Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain John Wick, Chapter 3. This movie tells after the legendary hitman gunning down a member of the High Table. He finds himself stripped of the organization's protective services and now stuck with a $14 million bounty on his head. He must fight his way through the streets of New York as he becomes the target of the world's most ruthless killers. What will happen next? Can he manage to survive? Let's find out in John Wick Chapter 3. John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum begins by showing John Wick running for safety, because the man has now been labeled excommunicado for the unauthorized killing of high-table crime lord Santino D'Antonio on the grounds of the New York Continental Hotel. Because John Wick's contract value was $14 million, which was the highest contract value on the high table today, almost all assassins were after John Wick. John sends his dog to safety with Charon, before he finally goes to the New York Public Library, where he retrieves a marker medallion and a rosary, which will surely come in handy during his escape. Even though the contract had not been activated, John had been intercepted by a tall, skinny assassin in the library. John had warned the man that the time had not yet come, but the man did not seem to care and immediately attacked John. Fierce fighting took place in the narrow aisle of shelves, until finally, John managed to kill the man using a book, although in the process, John was seriously injured. With 10 minutes remaining before his excommunicado status was activated, John rushed to seek medical care from an underworld doctor. But his $14 million bounty activates before the doctor can finish, forcing John to complete the suturing himself, and shot the doctor so the high table wouldn't know that the doctor had helped him. Upon leaving, he is quickly pursued by various gangs of assassins, until John breaks into the weapons museum and assembles some old weapons to kill his attackers. Not only that, John was also involved in a fairly fierce close-range fight with other assassins, and John managed to beat them all brutally. It didn't stop there. John was again attacked by a group of assassins, until he managed to defeat them all and fled on a horse. On the bustling city streets, John Wick is again being chased by assassins on motorbikes, but John manages to escape from them and makes his way to a theater. After showing his medal and rosary, John was immediately allowed into the theater. On the other hand, the high table had raised the value of John Wick's contract to $15 million, due to the difficulty of killing the legendary John Wick. There, John meets the director, a woman who is a former hitman, as well as the head of the Rusker Roma crime syndicate, where he presents the rosary and demands safe passage to Casablanca in Morocco. At first, she refused to help John Wick for fear of breaking the rules of the high table, but because John was once one of them, and that woman also had a blood oath to John, so the director reluctantly helped him. As a sign that her debt to John was paid off, the director then ordered her men to stamp John with a hot iron. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman is seen walking arrogantly in the lobby of the Continental Hotel. The woman was the adjudicator, who was sent directly by the high table to solve all the problems that John Wick had caused. The adjudicator then goes to Winston, the hotel manager for the Continental, informing that Winston has 7 days to resign from his position as hotel manager at the Continental for helping John Wick, which indirectly violates the high table rules. The same thing was conveyed to the Bowery King, where the adjudicator also removed the man from his current position for helping John Wick. The Bowery King had refused to unilaterally dismiss and threatened the adjudicator. But then, he realized that his fight against the high table would be in vain. Meanwhile, John has arrived in Casablanca, Morocco, and intends to meet his old friend. John was attacked by a group of people in a dark alley, before being rescued by a man who took him to the Casablanca branch of the Continental Hotel. There, John finally met Sofia, a former friend and manager of the Moroccan Continental. John presents a marker, which he obtained after helping Sofia to protect her daughter, and demands to be directed to the Elder, the only person above the high table. Sofia refused John's request because his status was already excommunicado, and helping John Wick was tantamount to violating the high table rules. However, because John has a marker, Sofia has to fulfill her commitment. She reluctantly takes John to Barada, her former boss, who most likely knows the location where John can find the Elder. Elsewhere, the adjudicator visits a sushi restaurant and meets a man named Zero. She then hires Zero, a Japanese assassin, and orders him to punish anyone who helps John Wick during his escape. The adjudicator then went to the director and ordered Zero to stab the director through both of her hands as penance for aiding John Wick. Meanwhile, John and Sofia visit Barada, where the man says that the Elder cannot be found by anyone, except the Elder himself who came to the person. Barada tells John that he may find the Elder by wandering through the desert until he can no longer walk, and John might meet the Elder if he got lucky enough not to die of dehydration. When John and Sofia are about to leave, Barada stops them and asks for one of Sofia's dogs in exchange for the information he has told. Because Sofia refuses to give her dog, Barada shoots the dog, which survives due to its bulletproof vest. However, Sophia was already angry because Barada hurt her beloved dog. The woman then went berserk and attacked Barada. Sophia and John also exchanged fire with Barada and his men, until finally, Barada was pressed. Sophia wants to kill Barada, but in the end, she only injures him on John's warning. They fight their way out of the Kasbah and drive into the desert where she leaves John. Armed with only a bottle of water, John wades through the desert under the scorching sun, where he has only one goal: to find the Elder. 7 days later, the Adjudicator and Zero confront the Bowery King, who refuses to abdicate his position. In response, Zero's pupils slaughter his men, while the king is slashed 7 times with a wakizashi as penance. The scene then switches and shows John collapsing unconscious in the desert and being found by one of the High Table's henchmen. John is then taken to the residence of the Elder, who asks John the reason for coming to see him. John then begged the Elder to revoke his excommunicado status and restore his membership status. John states that he wants to live to keep the memory of the love he once had with his late wife. The Elder agrees to forgive John's transgressions if he kills Winston and remains subservient to the High Table for the remainder of his life. Having no other choice, John accepts the Elder's offer, and to show his fealty, John severs his ring finger and gives his wedding ring to the Elder. Shortly afterwards, John returned to New York and immediately confronted the assassins who were still after him. But then, Zero and his pupils came and crippled the other assassins because Zero had received direct orders from the Adjudicator to kill John Wick. Zero then ordered his pupils to attack John Wick, but he was able to easily defeat Zero's pupils, until finally, John and Zero got into a fierce fight. John was almost crushed, but he made it to the Continental and found refuge after the Elder restored his status. Before John went to see Winston, Zero then revealed to John that he was actually a big fan of the legendary John Wick, and felt honored to meet John Wick in person. John finally met with Winston, who already knew that John had a pact with the Elder to kill him. But as it turned out, John had never intended to kill Winston. Not long after, the Adjudicator arrives, but Winston refuses to abdicate and John refuses to kill him, leading the Adjudicator to revoke the Continental's neutral status and send both Zero and an army of heavily armed High Table enforcers to kill John and Winston. Knowing the impending attack in the near future, Winston then took John to the armory and armed John and Sharon, as well as the hotel staff who chose to be loyal to Winston. Not long after, the High Table army enforcers arrived and attacked the Continental. During the battle, John and Sharon notice that the High Table enforcers are wearing special protective vests, so they can't be hurt by the bullets they use. The two of them then return to the weapons storage room and replace their ammunition with special bullets. With Sharon's help, John finally manages to overthrow all of the High Table enforcers. But shortly after, John is ambushed by Zero and his pupils. John manages to kill all of Zero's pupils except 2 Indonesian pupils who surrender with honor after being beaten by the legendary assassin John Wick. John finally confronted Zero again and was involved in a fierce duel with him, where Zero was very ambitious to overthrow the legendary John Wick in order to gain a higher reputation and respect in the crime world. But it seems Zero was dreaming too high because John easily beat the guy and let him die just like that. When morning came, Winston met the Adjudicator and made a deal that Winston would kill John Wick, and in return, Winston would regain his position and control as the manager of the Continental Hotel. Without a second thought, the Adjudicator agreed to a deal with Winston, who offered his lifelong loyalty to the High Table. When John arrives on the roof of the Continental Hotel, Winston shoots him straight away, causing John Wick, the legendary assassin, to fall from a height. After witnessing this, the Adjudicator hurried away from there, while Winston had officially taken back his position as manager of the Continental Hotel. As they were about to leave the Continental, the Adjudicator realized that John Wick's body wasn't where it should have been after falling from the roof. She then met Winston again and ordered Winston to determine whether John Wick was really dead or still alive, because she simply didn't want anything to do with John Wick anymore. Meanwhile, John, who was seriously injured from a fall from a height, is secretly taken to the heavily wounded Bowery King in an underground bunker, where John Wick and the Bowery King agree to join forces against the High Table. The film ends. Why did Winston negotiate with High Table representatives and betray John Wick just to secure his position as manager of the Continental Hotel? Did Winston really betray John Wick? Well, if Winston had intended to kill John Wick, he would have known that John Wick was wearing a bulletproof suit and should have shot John in the head. But Winston deliberately shot John Wick until he fell off the roof, where down below the Bowery King's men were already preparing to pick up John and take him to the Bowery King's hideout. It seems that Winston's betrayal is a plan that has been arranged by John Wick, Winston, and also the Bowery King to destroy the High Table.